Okay, so let's talk about what has been trending as relates to the Commonwealth summit that concluded a couple of days ago. People are talking about the countries that ditched the Commonwealth, and I think this is important for us to talk about this. I recently put out a video talking about the controversies surrounding this year's Commonwealth summit that occurred in Samoa, and the request at the hands of a lot of Caribbean countries that reparations, the conversation around reparations, restitutions to their country, as well as many other African countries who were affected by slavery, as well as colonialism, be at the agenda, right? Be a topic of discussion at the Commonwealth. And how it was quickly shut down by both King Charles III and his Prime Minister, Keir Starmer. I released this video a couple of days ago, and I want to discuss today what has occurred since then and the countries who ditched, right? They ditched attending this year's Commonwealth as a result of these conversations not being a part of the agenda. So I think it's a fascinating story, and one I want to discuss this because I think that the reason behind their ditching and snubbing King Charles at the Commonwealth has a far greater implication than many really appreciate. So let's talk about this. So according to Yahoo News, it says leaders ditch Commonwealth meeting in favor of Putin's summit in brutal blow to Starmer. Two of the most powerful leaders in Commonwealth have dropped out of the biennial meeting with the UK Prime Minister and monarch so that they can attend summits in Russia instead. It is a blow to Keir Starmer and King Charles III, both of whom are traveling for 28 hours to host Commonwealth head of government meeting, known as the CHOGM. The king, who is the head of the Commonwealth, will still be hosting 55 nations in Samoa. Actually, 55 nations were expected to show. From the accounts that I've read, only 20 showed up. We'll get to that. But even though this is a gathering of state leaders, which only occurs once every 2 years, there will be fewer rather than famous faces missing. India's PM, Narendra Modi, and South Africa's President, Cyril Ramaphosa, will be attending BRICS in the Russian city of Kazan, a gathering of more than 20 developing nations, which claim to represent 45% of the world's population. I want you to really pay attention to that. There are two things that are significant in what I just read. That the likes of India and South Africa, right, decide that, you know what, I'm good with this. These are members of Commonwealth. They decide that, I'm good with this. We're going to go attend BRICS instead, right? Think about that. That's a significant thing. That they're choosing not to be part of this so-called Commonwealth discussion that doesn't benefit and hasn't benefited the country. To go be part of BRICS, an organization that is forming and becoming more formidable every passing day to rival NATO. The other thing I want you to think about in that statement is that the countries that make up BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, these countries make up 45% of the world's population. Think about that for a second. Just think about the significance of that from an economics standpoint and also military capability standpoint. Just think about that the fact that these 5 countries make up 45% of the world's population. Okay. As the summit is a part of Putin's effort to show that he actually does still have allies and is not alone in the world stage, despite ongoing sanctions from the West over his war in Ukraine. This is a major win for Moscow. So this is huge. So I want to talk about the African countries who also ditched this. Said, we're not attending this. Right? So here are the countries. South Africa, Egypt, Nigeria, Ghana, Cameroon, Senegal, Algeria, Ethiopia. All of these countries ditched the so-called Commonwealth government meeting that occurred in Samoa. Now, why did these countries ditch? Why are they deciding all of a sudden that we don't want to attend this? Because the conversations that need to be had is not being had. If we can't talk about reparations, right? the effect of slavery at the hands of the British government against Africa and African countries. If we can talk about colonialism and the damage that has caused to Africa and African people, then what are we talking about? So you have Caribbean countries step up and say, hey, we need to talk about this. And you have the audacity of both the Prime Minister and King Charles saying that, nah, we're good with this. We're not talking about this. You see, they don't want to talk about the things that affect us. They don't want to talk about the effect of slavery and colonialism and the destruction of our land and our countries and policies that they put in place today that have kept Africa and African countries subjugated. They don't want to talk about that. What they wanted to talk about in this summit were two things: climate change and immigration. They only want to talk about things that affect them. You see, immigration has been a big issue for the likes of England, the United States, France, Italy, European countries, and Western countries. Immigration is a big deal for them. Immigration is a huge issue for them. And what they've seen over the last few years, that it's an influx of many countries going to their country, citizens of countries going to their country. And so what they're trying to do now is they're trying to pay off, and they've been doing this for a couple of years now, to pay off countries, African countries, South American countries, to keep their citizens in their country. So the West and Europe get to destroy the economies of countries who are seeing the reverse effect of that as relates to immigration. So many people are leaving their country because their economy have been destroyed. Now, guess who was behind that? So when you look at the likes of the United States, they're seeing an influx of Venezuelans in the country. What is significant about that? The United States sanctioned Venezuelan oil from being sold to anywhere else to punish that country because the leader at the time of that country did not want to play ball with the United States. So rather than leave the country to itself and leave them alone, they sanctioned their economy. So Venezuela, who is one of the largest producers of oil, could not sell its oil to countries because it was sanctioned by the United States. And they couldn't get their product to be bought by any other country because any country willing to do business with them was fearful of being sanctioned because Venezuela was sanctioned. So they crippled that economy. So the citizens now are going over there. You have Britain, who has also crippled African countries, Nigeria, Ghana, many of its once colonized regions, crippled it, stole their resources, stole all their infrastructure, stole all their wealth, stole it, destroyed their economy, made sure they put puppets in place to keep those places, impoverished, put policies in place, right, that only gave them the so-called independence, destroyed that whole region, that the citizens are now making their way over there to say, you know what, I'm going to go over here and tap into my resources. That's a problem for them. You have the likes of France. It's once colonized region also. Niger, Burkina Faso, Mali, right? Those Francophone countries. Destroy those areas, loot their stuff, tax them every year, where there were billions of dollars that France taxes its once colonies that are paid to France. Every year, destroy their economy. And now when those citizens are going over there, they're complaining. So now what the agenda and the strategy that these countries now are trying to use to combat something that's a problem for them is to get African countries to do their dirty work for them. So let's pay off and pay African countries and say, hey, you know what, when we meet for these summits, like, we meet for the Commonwealth summit, we only want to talk about the things that affect us. We don't want to talk about what affects you. Stop bringing up slavery. Stop bringing up reparations. This is not our problem, right? This is not. We want to talk about how you can be a part of solving immigration. So they pay African countries to deter their citizens from coming to their country, so their countries can solve the issue of immigration. This is what they've been doing, which is why the Trump administration also paid off Mexico to do what is called Remain in Mexico policy. It's a strategy they're using right now. So a few corrupt leaders take money, right? Take money from these countries that are causing the demise of their country causing the issues, the immigration issues in this country, which they're now becoming a problem for them as a reverse of the policies they put in place to destroy the economy of those countries. Now they're crying wolf. So they're doing that to Africa. And African countries, some of the African countries have been taking money, right? No, but not all African countries. You have the likes of Botswana in April say, no, we're good. Because the UK tried to pay off Botswana the same way they did with Rwanda to take the migrants from England to go to Botswana. And Botswana said, no, we're good with this. Botswana, a very small country, is in southern part of Africa, says that we're good with this. We're not taking your money, right? And tells the like of the the UK to go to hell. Because now that's what they're doing, is try to make their problem Africa's problem. So they don't want to talk about what affects us. They want to talk about what affects them. Next thing I want to talk about is climate change. What does Africa got to do with climate change? What does Africa got to do with climate change? See, Africa and the 54 countries that make up Africa don't contribute to the emission of CO2 as much as you find these other countries, these so-called developed countries. They are the big pollutants of climate change. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Because that's the only thing that they want to talk about, right? Forget your own issue. Forget what's affecting you. Forget what's going on. Forget how we're destroying your economy and all of that. Forget that doesn't bother us, right? Because we're benefiting. Let's talk about what's affecting our country and how you can help us. Here are the top 10 polluters in the world as relates to CO2 emission. Okay, you ready for this? Okay. Number 1, China. China emits 14 billion tons of CO2 every year. Number 2, United States. 6 billion tons of carbon dioxide emission into the air. The United States contributes about 13% of CO2 emission into the world. Yeah. And you know where they come from? They come from transportation, all the fancy cars, they come from the electricity generation, the stuff that they take from Africa so they can power their country. That pollutes the air, the environment. And they come from all their manufacturing sector. So these countries get to destroy the earth, right? Pollute the earth. And they go to Africa and tell Africa, help us to clean up this mess. But let's not talk about the stuff that bothers you and the stuff that really matters to you. Let's talk about stuff that matters to us because you're in this, right? Okay. India, 3.5 billion tons of CO2. Russia, 2 billion tons of CO2. And these other countries, the next series of countries, contribute about 2 billion. Russia, Japan, Brazil, Iran, Indonesia, all contribute a little over 2 billion tons of CO2. And lastly, Mexico. These are the top 10 countries. Do you see me mention any African country here? Did you hear me talk about any African country? Is there any African country representing what I just talked about? No. So why are we having this conversation? Why is this conversation a conversation at the summit, Commonwealth summit, that involves African countries, right, who were once colonized by Britain? And so the conversation that African countries want to have, sensible conversation that affect them, which is slavery and the paying of restitutions for what England did to Africa. They don't want to talk about that. So don't bring that up again. This is what they said. Don't ever bring that up again. So a lot of African countries say, you know what, let's ditch this. This is nonsense. Why are we attending this? So they snubbed the so-called King Charles III and his prime minister, who took 28 hours to get there. And they say, you know what, we're not coming over here. And guess what? The reason for the snub is even more telling. The countries that did not attend are choosing to go to a BRICS summit in Russia. Think about the significance of that. Think about how much of a slap that is. Not only did they not show up because you don't want to talk about the stuff they want to talk about, they're choosing to go to the one organization, to attend the one organization that is an enemy to the West and Europe. BRICS. Let's talk about BRICS for a second. Let's talk about the significance of BRICS. Because BRICS is what is giving the likes of South Africa. South Africa, which is a very, very small place, is stepping up and saying, you know what? Enough is enough. You see, South Africa, and let me talk about South Africa for a second. So South Africa understands that the position that it has taken in the past, especially with the history of South Africa had no business in aligning itself to any Western European country. South Africa had no business in doing this, especially with what the Europeans did with apartheid in South Africa. There was no reason South Africa should have aligned itself to any Western or British country. Should not have. But it did. And over the years, South Africa realized that its allegiance to these countries is not benefiting them. So South Africa joined the likes of China and Brazil to form the organization that we know as BRICS today. See, this was a laughing stock to the West and Europe, places that like to downplay everybody else's effort and only elevate their effort. When BRICS was created a couple of years ago, it was a laughing stock. You should have seen the political pundits. Many people were saying this is not going to do anything. You're talking about Russia, an enemy of the state to pretty much everywhere in the world. Talk about China, they downplay the economy. China, which is the second largest economy in the world, quickly growing to become number one, even though they have an economic situation right now, but they'll quickly get out of that, right? Their mass itself and their large population gives them an advantage over any country. And now they're the second largest, looking to be number one economy in the world. Says that they're going to start an organization to rival NATO. NATO alliances downplay this whole thing by having their media and their puppets, right, fill the airwaves with propaganda nonsense. That didn't work because over the years, what did we see? We saw this organization become stronger and stronger to the point that we had the likes of Saudi Arabia become a member of this organization. So it's become a significant thing. Now you have African countries who in recent years had coups, Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, break away from the clutches of Western dominance in their country because they've not seen any benefit to that. Saying, no, we're good. Now they're aligning themselves with members of BRICS. I have no doubt that these ones are trying to join BRICS too. You have other countries, South American countries, countries in East Asia, also want to align with BRICS. So this is now changing the political landscape to the point that you have a country like South Africa dare to sue a country like Israel over the war between Israel and Palestine. South Africa last year, or a couple of years ago, took Israel to court, to the International Court of Justice, because of the atrocities that Israel is committing in Palestine. They dared to do this. Why? Because they're part of a large organization now. Then you have countries in Africa ditch the Commonwealth, which is not a benefit to them, and say, you know what, we're going to go attend the summit in BRICS, the BRICS summit. Do you see how significant this is? There's obviously a change, a global geopolitical change right here that's going up before our eyes. That you have the stronghold that US, right, England, France, many of these other European countries who have dominated, right, geopolitics for years, now losing grips. So now they want Africa to help solve their issues for them. No. This is an issue that they created. And I'm going to talk about immigration in my next video because it's something that affects us. It's something that we need to talk about. Because while everyone else is grappling here in this part of the world about how immigrants are flooding their country and how people are leaving their country, they're not talking about that they were the creator of the issues that they're having today. They lived off of the backs of these other countries, destroyed their countries, kept them crippled, kept them bound to make sure that they didn't grow. Now that these citizens are coming to their country, now it's a problem. Right? It's a problem for them. So I'm going to talk about immigration in my upcoming video. So stay tuned to that. And then it's even now something that they want to shift the problem to Africa. And they want African countries to play a role in solving their problems for them. No. No. How about you start by paying us our money first? Huh? How about you start with the reparations that you owe Africa? How about you start that? Because until England want to have that conversation, no, we're not talking about this. Right? Immigration is not a problem. That is your problem. That is a problem you created. So you're going to have to deal with that. And that is to the UK, the US, Italy, and France. These ones who stole from other countries. Immigration is not a problem. That's your problem. What is our problem is reparations. We need you to solve the issues that you caused in our region as a result of slavery, stealing our people, colonialism, destroying our land, polluting our land, destroying our artifacts, stealing our raw materials, destroying our land. We need you to pay for that. Until then, we don't bring your issues to our issues. We don't know about that. That's not our problem. You need to go fix your own problem. Do you understand this? Do you understand what I'm talking about? So you have the likes of Botswana saying, hey, we're good. I'm not taking your money. You're not going to make that my problem. It's not my problem. And you're going to have many other countries step up. But here's what I want to say and I'll close. I think it's great that African countries are reassessing their allegiance and they are realigning themselves with other organizations that would benefit them. I think it's great that African countries have now understood that NATO, the West, and Europe have not benefited them for years. I mean, name me one African country who has been part of this so-called Commonwealth organization, these cults, right? Or any other organization that is spearheaded by the West or Europe. Name me one that has benefited economically or militarily. Name me one African country who can boast of a strong economy today. Or name me one African country who can boast of a strong border. Name me one. None. See, this was the lie that a lot of these European countries promised to Africa when they gave them the so-called independence and latched them to these so-called organizations like the Commonwealth or whatever that they have, right? Is that we're going to help you economically and we're going to help defend you whether if an outside forces attacks you. What we've seen is the reverse. We've seen the rise of Islamic insurgencies in African countries, countries who supposedly had the protection of all these so-called Western European places. What we've seen is the deterioration of African economies, right? So African countries are asking that this has not benefited us. Why are we in this? So until Africa and African countries begin to understand that rather than going and partnering and looking for a protector, you need to be your own protector. Rather than trying to join organizations, right, like BRICS or the protection of the West and Europe, rather than do that, because that is only a temporary situation. Even while BRICS could be an answer today, it's not an answer tomorrow for Africa. Even while BRICS, right, could be a solution today for Africa, it is not going to be a long-term solution, because what do we see with empires that are large? Is they become dictators. They become dictators. So while we might look at BRICS as, oh, this is a great strategy for Africa, right? Yeah, today is not tomorrow, because later on, when China becomes number one and they become the global power, they'll begin to do exactly the same thing that the United States and England, China and Russia, and India. They're going to try to do the exact same thing, right, against Africa. So Africa gets to become the power and the life source for all these countries, but is the only one losing out of this whole thing. Because if you don't have it, if you can't boast of a strong economy, and you can defend your borders, you don't have any place in the world stage. I don't know for the life of me why no African country has nuclear capability. I don't know for the life of me why African countries are not allowed to fortify themselves with nuclear weapons, nuclear capability. You see, the reason why the United States will not mess with the likes of North Korea, as much as they hate that country, right? Is because North Korea has nuclear weapons. The reason why the United States will never dare to go to war and mess with that country, as much as they hate them, they can demonize them all they want. They can say whatever they want. It's because that country and that leader has nuclear capability. That in case you want to go a mano a mano, they're willing to do this. The reason why Russia is a threat to the United States is because Russia has nuclear capability. How is it possible that Africa, in all the years, not one country, has a military might strong enough to defend its borders? So Africa will continue to be looking and buying protection from all these countries who know that it comes at the cost, at the price. So while you might go and look for a new boss, a new master, you leave one to go to another, leave one devil to go to the next devil, they'll begin to show themselves, right? You see, find out you're having the same old issue because you are just the little peon who's looking for protection. At what cost? At the cost of your resources, your own people. So rather than Africa running from pillar to post, right, looking to buy protection, leaving one organization to go and join another organization, you need to fortify your own defenses. You need to find a way to improve your military capability in the world stage. Because when you improve your military capability in the world stage, no one will mess with you. See, one thing the United States does well, no matter what president comes in, whether it's a Democrat or it's a Republican, one thing they don't argue about is defense budgeting. They don't argue about this because they all understand that for a nation to be strong and to not have the outside threats, they need to make sure that they are military defense capable to defend themselves. So they don't argue about this. So with all the billions of dollars generated in Africa through taxes from their citizens and all the monies they get, I don't understand why no one African country can boast of this. And until Africa is able to boast of this and begin to understand that its strength is in itself and not in outside forces or organization, Africa will always be second, will always play third place, right? Inferior place to all of this world stage. Africa will continue to be the breeding ground, right, of negativity and destruction at the hands of all these other players. A lot of African countries have gridlocked themselves, right, have sold their resources, have sold themselves. Puppets that lived in Africa, puppets that once ruled African countries, have sold their countries to these countries, right, signed contracts and policies. They have gridlocked the economy. So it's almost virtually impossible to break away from. The only way they break away from that is that Africa will need to be economically strong, and Africa should be strong because Africa is the only continent that supplies raw material to every other places. Africa needs to understand its strength. Africa needs to understand the position it plays. African people need to understand the power and the card they hold. That until you build and fortify your own house, you're always going to be vulnerable to anyone else. And I hope that African leaders are paying attention. And I hope that African leaders and African citizens, those who are in key positions, begin to reevaluate where their allegiance and their strength or their position in the world need to be. Africa needs to stand on its own. This was what Gaddafi's vision for Africa was. This is what his vision for Africa was. And they paid some African corrupt leaders to take him out. And until Africa understands that that's what we need to do, rather than joining organizations whose interests are undoubtedly are not going to align with your interests at some point in history, you need to begin building yourself today. Until Africa does that, Africa will always be second class to everything. And I hope that Africa wakes up, and African countries are waking up. But we need more African countries to wake up. Thank you all for watching. Please like this video, share the content, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you all.
Nu vill jag kunna ge tillbaka allt jag inte kunna ge förut. Det finns ingen annan där som kan stå här by my side, oh why. Sättet du rör på det får mig att dö för dig baby. För de här yardis, de vill ju bara dra ner oss. Men du är fett och vanlig. Och det jag lägger all min tid. Jag vill ha det. Du får mig känna safety.